Be going over which party I Senate control come this November. So we're starting out with 43 to 43. There are 14 competitive seats here in the map. We'll start with the likely Republican and end with the tilt states for both parties. So starting out with the first likely Republican state, we have the state of South Carolina. Going to put that into the likely Republican column. This state virtually always votes red, so I don't think anything will change. It is interesting that the margin has narrowed up enough for it to end up in the likely instead of safe category, but that's going to be the call there in South Carolina. And then we have the state of Florida, which I also feel very confident in putting in the Republican Party's column. This state used to be very competitors and in the past, but since really the era of Trump, the state has gone further and further to the right. It has consistently elected Republicans for virtually every office. And I think that this November will be no exception, and that the state will end up voting for a Republican for the Senate seat there in the state of Florida. And then we're going to get to the state of Montana. Montana, I'm going to also be putting into the Republican Party's column. This state had a Democratic senator 2 years ago. However, he lost his reelection bid in 2024, John Tester. And currently, the Republican incumbent senator who holds this seat currently is retiring, and that will give Democrats a slightly better edge in potentially narrowing up the margin in the state of Montana. I ultimately don't think that Democrats will be able to win this seat. I think they're far from that, but I do think things could realistically narrow up to a likely and possibly even lean margin, but that is going to be the call there in the state of Montana. And I believe that will be the end of the likely Republican states. Next up, we'll be getting to the likely Democratic states. For that, we're going to go north to the first state, being the state of Minnesota. Going to put that into the Democratic Party's column. The state has had a very long history of voting blue. And it has been in the news quite a few times since the beginning of the second Trump administration in regularly rejecting the Trump administration, as well as just general not big fans of Republicans and Trump. So that is going to be a pretty easy call for me to make, 44 to 46. That's actually going to be the only state in the likely Democratic category. We'll move on now to the lean Republican states. For that, we have the state of Nebraska. The state is generally in the safe margin, and there actually isn't a Democrat running for this seat. There is an independent, however, Dan Osborne, and I think that he will perform well enough to narrow the state up from what is generally regarded as a safe Republican seat all the way to a lean Republican seat, and that is a very impressive feat that an independent can do that. There isn't a Democratic candidate, so that vote will largely go towards the independent Dan Osborne, but that will be the call there in the state of Nebraska. And then we're going to head over to do the lean blue seats. I think that will be the end of the lean red. For that, we have the state of New Hampshire. Going to put that into the lean blue column. The state voted for Harris in 2024, and if Democrats can win that state during that bad presidential election year, I think the state is virtually certain to vote blue for the Senate level in an environment that is shaping up to be considerably better for the Democratic Party when compared to 2024. And then we're going to go down to Georgia. Georgia, I feel pretty confident in putting that into the lean blue column. John Ossoff is the current Democratic senator from the state of Georgia, and I think that he will do well enough to win re-election to the U.S. Senate fairly easily. And then we're going to get to the state of North Carolina. North Carolina is actually going to be the first flip of the prediction for this being a seat flipped from red to blue. So that will be one more seat going from red to blue and another seat for the Democrats in the Democratic column. And then I think that will be the end of the lean blue seats. Next up, we're going to get to the tilt states for each respective. We're going to start with the state of Iowa, which I feel reasonably confident that it will end up in the Republican Party's category. This state has generally votes red for the presidential level, the Senate level, the gubernatorial. I do think it is a real possibility that the Democratic gubernatorial candidate in the state of Iowa could potentially win, but on the Senate level, I think the most likely outcome is that the state ends up in the Republican Party's column. And then we get to the state of Texas, which I next feel reasonably confident in putting that in the Republican Party's category. I think it really could be a lean margin, but I think with a Democratic candidate such as James Tallarico, who has pretty wide support, especially when compared to a rather lackluster, scandal-plagued candidate like Ken Paxton, I think that ultimately Ken Paxton will win, but that it will be more narrow than Republicans really are hoping this election will be in the state of Texas. And then we're going to do a tilt blue state for the Democratic Party. For that, we have the state of Michigan, one more in the Democratic Party's column. And then really it's going to be these three states that determine control of the US, being Maine, Ohio, and Alaska. We will start with the state of Alaska because I feel reasonably well, I think really this state could go either way. These honestly could realistically flip the other way. This is just if I had to make a prediction what I would call them as. Alaska, there are, interestingly enough, going to be two Dan Sullivans on the election ballot here, both Republicans, only one of which is the current Republican incumbent Senator Dan Sullivan. But there's another guy who, with the same name running as a Republican. So that will be an interesting aspect of the race. I do think that Mary Peltola will eventually win this race. I think it will be close, but for now, that's going to be the call there. And then we get to the remaining two states. I have the state of, I think I'm actually going to flip my prediction. Graham, the Democrat, I think that Susan Collins may be able to win this time around. She's looking like she has, especially if these scandals continue to pile up for the Democratic Party's nominee. And I think that it is a very real possibility. It could still go blue. But I think just based on the news that we've been seeing recently out of the Democratic candidate in Maine, I think that the state will remain in Susan Collins' column. She has done well in the past and has done well against high-name notable Democrats. And I think it will be interesting to see if a more Bernie-esque progressive Democrat has a better chance in a state like Maine. I personally don't think he'll be able to win, but that is going to be the call there in Maine. And finally, we have the state that will give Republicans even a two-seat advantage in the U.S. Senate, that being the state of Ohio, which I'm going to call for the Republicans. And that will be the call there in Ohio. This end up map looking like 51 for the Republicans to 49 for the Democrats. We can take a look, and there are two states where an independent could win. Ultimately, I don't have either of those going purple, but that is going to be called there. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks.